I want to welcome everybody to a very special edition of FITSFiles, your home for true crime wherever you download podcast, Apple, Spotify. We're glad you're here. This is, again, a very special episode. We had planned this week to bring you the second episode of our Death on the Tracks series, an investigation into an unsolved murder in Dorchester County, South Carolina, that our Jen Wood and Callie Lyons have been leading for the last few months, trying to get to the bottom of that case. Our premiere episode on that aired just last week. And make no mistake, we will be back to that story in short order. But this week, events thrust a story onto us that we've been covering here at FITSNews for several years now. In fact, we broke the story of the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga way back on June the 8th, 2021, when we filed the first report about a double homicide at Moselle, the Murdaugh family property down in Colleton County, South Carolina. Now, since that fateful morning, the murders took place the previous evening, June 7, 2021. Since that moment, this story has captivated a nation. And the trial of Alec Murdaugh, who was convicted for those murders, was an international event. It drew the eyes of the world to Walterboro, South Carolina. And after 6 weeks of riveting testimony, of evidence, of all sorts of forensics, of electronic phone data, vehicular tracking data, Alec Murdaugh, after 6 weeks, was convicted of the murders of his late wife, Maggie Murdaugh, and his younger son, Paul Murdaugh. FITSNews was in Walterboro for all 6 weeks of the trial. We live streamed it. We provided our analysis throughout that trial. And I think everybody on this panel, I'm joined, by the way, our research director, Jen Wood, special projects director, Dylan Nolan, and lead researcher, Callie Lyons. Thanks, by the way, to all you guys for doing this on such short notice. But guys, as we watched that trial, I think everyone here felt when it was over that while the case may not have been as ironclad as we wanted, I felt justice was done because Alec Murdaugh clearly lied about being at the crime scene, clearly lied about a whole host of other things. And if there were others involved, he had a chance to say so, and he didn't. So at that point, to me, guilty. But let's go around real quick. And before we get into the events that led to this episode, Jen, I want to start with you. What was your guilty, not guilty after you watched that 6-week trial?
Woohoo. I still struggle with that. I'm one of those people, I don't necessarily think he pulled the trigger, but I think he was there, and I think he knows who did. But I think the verdict was just. I mean, I think the case presented by the Attorney General's office was solid.
But let me put you on the spot again. Were you sitting on that jury? Because we're going to talk about this jury a lot on this episode. But Jen, were you on that jury? Would you have voted to convict or acquit?
So when the trial ended, closing arguments ended, I would have convicted. I thought they presented enough.
I think we actually had a conversation a couple of weeks into the trial once the Snapchat video was entered into evidence. And that was kind of my turning point where I thought, okay, even if we don't have the direct evidence of Alex with the gun, there's no reason to conceal your identity and to just keep digging yourself into the hole of that lie. And if I were sitting on that jury, that would be what would make me move to convict him.
All right. 3-0. Callie, are you the outlier or are you with us on this? Go either way.
I kind of wish I was. But no, when the verdicts came through, I thought they had it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about this now because there was a person near and dear to all of our hearts, I believe, who read those verdicts. A woman who very gracefully managed this trial, who was incredibly accommodating to the media, who worked tirelessly to put Walterboro's best foot forward. And I'm referring to Clerk of Court Becky Hill. Miss Becky, as everyone called her. In fact, we had her on this program not long ago, not FITSFiles, but on FITSNews.com, we had her on a segment talking about her book, which, again, we're going to get into that in a second. But Becky Hill read those verdicts out, and it was one of those moments, Jen, everybody will remember where they were, what they were doing, what they were feeling when those guilty verdicts rang out. But it was Becky Hill's voice, which broadcast those verdicts to the world. But now, the reason we're here today, the reason that we have put this episode, our very first Murdaugh episode on FITSFiles, into the forefront, relates to some stunning allegations that were dropped this week by attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, who were Alec Murdaugh's defense attorneys. And Jen, walk us through these allegations that were filed today by Harpootlian and Griffin.
So, I mean, we had filed the story last week. We knew that there was a big motion coming regarding his appeal. So we knew it was coming, but I'm not entirely sure that we knew the scope of it, how enormous the allegations they were going to be lodging, how big it was. And even as I was reading through it this morning, was surprised. But they're saying that Becky Hill, in the course of her position as clerk of court, influenced the jury relating towards their verdict. Some of the things that they're alleging she did, she told the jury before Alex began testifying, watch his body language, watch him closely, look at his actions, look at his movements. And according to an affidavit filed by one juror, they understood that to mean that Mr. Murdaugh was guilty. There's so much in this. And then there was the egg juror, little background, that was dismissed in the middle of closing arguments because a Facebook post had been made in a local community Facebook group by her alleged ex-husband, saying that she was discussing the case outside of court, which of course jurors aren't allowed to do. And this motion alleges that the ex-husband never made that post, that it was misrepresented to Judge Newman, that it just kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah, just a whole host of jury tampering allegations, all of which, based on the affidavits of these jurors, revolve around Becky Hill. And Dylan, you were the producer on the interview we did with Becky Hill a few weeks ago. Set this clip up for us. Walk us through what we had, the conversation we had with Becky.
Sure. So Becky Hill recently published a book. I wish I had a copy to hold up right now, but Becky was doing a lot of media, and this seems to have come back to bite her pretty hard recently. But we were one of the stops on the media tour. We were, of course, happy to have Becky because she was so kind to us throughout the whole Murdaugh trial. Happy to help her promote her book. But the book focuses on the jury very much so, and that might seem strange to people who are familiar with the legal system because usually the clerk of court is not directly interacting with the jury on things that are at all material. Of course, you'll see them throughout the day and say, do you guys need water? Do you guys need a cup of coffee? Everybody doing well? But you're not usually talking to them about the case. So you had some questions about the jury that I think that we might want to play right now, given this new context.
Let's roll that clip. You wrote in your book, though, about sometimes juries come together, sometimes they don't. But you wrote that this jury was almost like a family. I mean, they were so close. Tell us a little bit about how those relationships developed and how they evolved over the course of the trial.
They bonded immediately from the time that they met back in the room, and they were all picked together on Tuesday of January. And they were prayerful. I believe I say this in my book. They were very perceptive, and they were just a pack. They stayed together. They treated each other like family. I could tell just from talking to the jurors about daily things, nothing about the trial at all. But I've been around a jury for a long time, different juries for a long time, and you get to know the layout of a jury, and just you can get a feel from how juries are going to be. And I learned that this jury, they were tight. They started every morning out with prayer. They were very watchful. They were very perceptive in the things that they were listening to, the things they were watching during the trial, especially when we went to Moselle at the very end of the trial. That was very telling. And just by observation, I knew that the verdict was already pretty sealed when we went to Moselle. There wasn't going to take much, and I knew it wasn't going to take long for them to come to a decision about a verdict.
So we're certainly seeing that with a new context here. Will, what are you thinking about what you asked Becky after reading her book now?
Again, I remember reading that book prior to that interview and just thinking, wow, this woman was literally, finger on the pulse of this jury. And now you start to wonder, though, did she know so much about what they were thinking because she was directing them? And Jen and Cal, as we start talking about this, I want to ask you both about this. The allegation is now not that Becky Hill knew too much about what was happening with the jury, because obviously that would be one kettle of fish. But now we're talking about allegations that she was pushing them to view this case a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that during the course of the trial, nobody should be having any conversations with the jury about what's being presented to them by defense or prosecutors. Nobody, including the clerk of court, including the bailiff. They can ask if they need water, if they're a vegetarian, but it is that is just the rule. That I mean,
If they're smokers, which we're going to get to in a minute.
Yeah, I mean that's and it's people who work in the courthouse know that rule.
I want to go around the horn with you guys on this. I put up a tweet shortly before we came on to record this program, and I haven't checked to see if people are shaming it or not, but I put this out there. If half of what is in this complaint filed by Harpootlian and Griffin, if half of what is in this complaint is proven even half true, not only will Alec Murdaugh get a new trial, he will in fact deserve a new trial. And I want to go around, agree or disagree. Callie, let's start with you.
Absolutely. It's embarrassing and troubling if even half of it is true. I think if you saw jury selection, you got a big healthy dose of Becky's personality. She was very much interacting with the public. She's funny. She's personable. So initially reading this motion, I expected to see that side of her personality. I didn't expect how far she went.
Mm-hmm. And again, they are mere allegations, but as we're discussing, if even half of it is proven half true, absolutely. Jen, do you concur with Callie?
Yeah, I tried to, when I looked at the motion, after I got through the shock of reading it, I tried to pull it apart and say, okay, so if this part of what they're saying isn't true, but this is, does that change how you feel? And it didn't. I think if the jury truly said that what was said to them by Becky influenced their decision, I think he deserves a new trial.
Yeah, the sad thing is I think that just based off of what we heard in open court, without any sort of nudging either way, I think that the same verdict probably would have been reached. But the whole trial is completely out the window now, in my opinion. I think that it has to be done again. And the sad thing is that this case was a big embarrassment for the South Carolina legal system, the South Carolina law enforcement system. And it just continues even after he's been convicted.
Yeah, the revenge of the Murdaughs, huh? Let's go through this because I know we're going to get to the story of the egg juror, which, by the way, if you're just tuning into this story, we're going to walk you through the egg juror and how her dismissal on the morning of the verdict was essential to securing the convictions against Alec Murdaugh. We're going to walk you through that in a minute. But before, and I've got the complaint here, I did want to walk through some of the key allegations here. Arguably the most damning one we've just talked about briefly about how Clerk Hill allegedly instructed jurors to watch the motions of Alec Murdaugh during his testimony, to basically, presume that he was lying. In fact, one juror said they were led to believe based on what the clerk told them that he was lying. Another juror noting that they had felt they should vote to acquit Murdaugh, but were feeling pressure, particularly after one of the jurors was booted. And according to Harpootlian and Griffin in their filing, this juror was targeted by Becky Hill because Hill believed that she was a not guilty vote. And in fact, we know from our court sources, who, by the way, were not Becky Hill, but who were confirming much of what was published later in her book, we knew that this juror was a not guilty. And we knew that had that juror, again, the infamous egg juror, had she remained on the bench, this would have resulted in a mistrial. Jen, is that to you the worst part of this? The attempted influence, not only of the thoughts of the jury, but of the composition of the jury itself.
That, I think that's the part that disturbed me the most. And we clearly, that these are allegations made by Alec's defense team. The prosecution has 10 days to file a response motion. But that's the part where it shocked me, and I'm struggling to believe that. And that's the part that, when I said I pulled apart the motion, that's the part I pulled out, because to me that was the most shocking part. And I went back and read through it and said, okay, if that's not true, would I still think he deserves a new trial? And I still did, but yeah, that one shocked me.
Well, Dylan, let me ask you this. There's another component to this story too. It's not just an appeal involving whether or not Alec Murdaugh gets a new trial, which again, I think we've all just walked through this. I think we're all in agreement that if these allegations are true, he will get a new trial. But there was another communication from Murdaugh's attorneys that was submitted to the press along with this filing. Dylan, tell us a little bit about that and what it could involve for those involved in this story.
Murdaugh's attorneys asked Adair Ford Burroughs, who is the U.S. Attorney in South Carolina, to investigate, and specifically asked that the State Law Enforcement Division, who conducted the investigation into the double homicide, desist in any investigation into potential jury tampering here, because they obviously have an interest in the outcome of this case. Harpootlian went on to mention that the agent who we saw testify at the trial, David Owen, was named as SLED's Agent of the Year, or Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. I can't remember the exact award. He will be playing a pivotal role in the Death on the Track story, the story of DJ that we were telling last week and that we intended to continue telling this week. He's certainly not a SLED agent without controversy of his own, so I'd like for folks to keep that name in their head as we move forward. But that is why the defense team asked that the federal government get involved here, because it's clear that there are a lot of conflicts at the state level.
So we're not only looking at the possibility of a new trial for Alec Murdaugh, folks, we are looking at the possibility of a federal investigation into the first trial based on these allegations. So again, we knew this was going to be something big when the defense teased this at the end of the previous week. But my goodness, it's certainly much bigger than I think even any of us imagined it would be.
And folks have said, the Murdaugh trial, or the Murdaugh going down, would be the root of a lot of corrupt people in South Carolina having major problems. And we're just starting to see that. I think it's important to mention we're seeing federal involvement with the judiciary in South Carolina. And that's in its early days right now. It's in its infancy. But I think in a couple of months, we'll see that come into fruition. But this very well could be the impetus for something 6 months down the road, just like the death of David Ayler and his phone getting into federal custody was the impetus for the federal involvement in the judiciary. So we don't know what the implications of this are long-term, but the Murdaugh crime and corruption saga continues to expand.
Indeed. And as you mentioned there, David Ayler, a prominent attorney from Charleston, South Carolina, died of a fentanyl overdose in January of this year. And the investigation into the circumstances of his death has cast another net on some of the judges here in South Carolina. Obviously, the Murdaugh investigation casting a net on some of those judges. And as we reported on FITSNews.com recently, that federal investigation making significant progress into some of these corrupt judges, and hopefully it will hold them accountable by the time it's all said and done. Well, let me ask you guys this as we pivot back to this filing. The big allegation that really struck me against Clerk Hill, against Becky Hill, was not just these allegations of manipulating the jury, of trying to get them to place emphasis on certain testimony, ignore certain things, and of course the presumption of Alec Murdaugh's, the presumption that he was lying. But the other thing here is that we get into the removal of the egg juror. And Callie, I know you followed this. Walk us through, who is the egg juror and what exactly does this egg, where's the term egg juror come from?
Well, this just gets more fascinating all the time where she's, where she's concerned, really. We call her the egg juror because once she was dismissed, Judge Newman said, is there anything left behind that you'd like to get to take home? And she said, I want my eggs.
She said
so apparently the
eggs.
Jurors have become chummy with each other. Yeah, they were kind of swapping produce or something back there. So it's nice. They were becoming friends. It's kind of sweet. But at the heart of this is there was a Facebook post that alleged she was talking about court proceedings out of court. Mm-hmm. And now it appears, well, the claim is that never happened. There was no such Facebook post. The claim is that was made up, contrived by Becky Hill.
And I have to say, given all of the discussion during the trial about this alleged Facebook post, I am in the group that it was allegedly posted in, because I spent a lot of time in Walterboro and I used it for referrals for, haircuts and stuff. And I never did see that post. When somebody would post something about the trial in that group that they thought was interesting, somebody would always screenshot it and send it to me. And I looked and I never saw that post, which drives me crazy.
Well, and it's going to be fascinating to see as this, assuming there is a federal investigation, I have no reason to believe the feds will not affirmatively respond to the defense's request for an investigation based on these allegations. But it'll be very interesting as that investigation moves forward, Jen, to see if they're able to uncover any of the digital characteristics of that Facebook group to see, well, did anyone publish such a post?
Right. I think, as we learned during the trial, the forensic evidence, the electronic forensic evidence, the things they can do with that are broad and frightening on some occasions, but yeah.
And obviously, if there is no record of such a post, if they dig into the bowels of the Facebook algorithms, or you got to assume they store everything, but if they dig through all that and they find nothing, what does that mean for Becky Hill?
I don't know what that means. It's so confusing to me because I just can't imagine her making up a post. Was there ever a post? Was it deleted? Did it just never happen? If there was a post, who posted it? Because there's an affidavit from the ex-husband of the egg juror who allegedly made the post, who said, that's not my Facebook account, not my picture. My name is, Jonathan, not John.
Said he never made such a post.
They haven't seen each other in 10 years, him and his ex-wife. So where did that come from?
Here's the other thing we've got to consider. And Dylan, you and I were discussing this earlier today. Judge Clifton Newman. This is a man who earned international acclaim for his even-keeled, level-headed handling of this case. We joked that his blood pressure never got over, whatever, heart rate never above 70. This guy was cool as a cucumber during bomb threats, during all sorts of chaos during that trial. He kept it completely on the level. But we are now in a situation where Judge Newman, who made the decision to remove this juror, he is now in a position where he may be a witness not only to the allegations that the FBI might investigate, but particularly as it pertains to his decision to remove this juror. Dylan, what do you think about Judge Newman's positioning via the filing that we just looked at?
Well, he was on the cusp of retirement before this trial, so I'm sure he's not looking forward to being thrust back into the middle of this. But to make it clear for folks who don't know, Judge Newman won't be presiding over the second trial of Alec Murdaugh. He went out a couple of months ago, and did an interview at his college alma mater where he talked about the case, talked about his feelings towards the defendant. So obviously he's out. But yes, he will likely be testifying, as will the 12 jurors, as to what happened that day that the egg juror was removed and anything else that he might have seen or heard that is material to this.
And I want to remind our audience, on the night that Alec Murdaugh was found guilty, we published a story from the Colleton County Courthouse. Again, we were the first media outlet to report that there was a verdict. And obviously everyone then scrambled to go watch it as it unfolded. But as we reported that night, had this juror not been taken off, it would have been a hung jury. It would have been a mistrial, and the state would have had to try this thing again because she was, according to our sources, quote, dug in.
And we got a lot
budging.
of crap for that.
We did get a lot of crap.
I mean, it's like when we announced Alec was a person of interest in the murders. I mean, we still get a lot of crap for that, and our sources are good.
Well, they are, and we protect them. That's the other thing. And one of the things though that I do want to point out, because a lot of folks have gone back to that and said, well, it was Becky Hill, and it absolutely was not. I want to state that very clear, that while I can't say whether these allegations contained in this filing against her are true or not, we never got any indication one way or the other from Becky Hill about what the jury was thinking or what they weren't thinking. We had plenty of sources that were giving us that information, but can assure our audience she was not one of them. But guys, where does this go from here? Jen, why don't you walk us through a little bit of this process regarding what happens next?
So the first thing that they did today was they filed a stay with the Court of Appeals to stay the appeal that they had filed just right after the trial. And that's because you cannot file in the trial court if you have an appeal pending. So they're going to pause that appeal. They're going to put a stay on it. And they've filed this motion that they filed with the trial court. It's going to go, it should go to Judge Newman, but I'm not, clearly we've discussed how he likely wouldn't be appropriate, would likely recuse himself, but he hasn't done that yet. So as of right now, it's going to go to Judge Newman. The prosecution's got 10 days to file their response, and then the judge will consider all of that and determine whether or not there's going to be a hearing, and that's called a Rummer hearing.
And we did get a statement as this story was unfolding today from the Office of the Attorney General, Alan Wilson. It is attributed to the Attorney General himself, who actually participated in the trial. A very interesting development. Not only did he participate, he actually took one of the key witnesses during the rebuttal phase of the state's case. Alan Wilson, the Attorney General of South Carolina, quote, "We are currently reviewing the defense's latest motion and will respond through the legal process at the appropriate time." Now, it's an interesting dynamic they're in here because what do you say if you're the state here, guys? I think they're in a position the state really has to endorse an investigation. Dylan, what do you think?
I completely agree. They're going to look terrible unless they endorse an investigation, and if they find what it is likely that they will find, they're going to have to be on the same side as the defense here and coming to the court and saying, we need a new trial. Puts them in a terrible
you think they
position.
are going to...
I hadn't even thought of that.
They're going to look terrible if, in the wake of a bunch of evidence that there was serious jury tampering, if they try to dig in their heels and say, no, we're sticking with this verdict. And by the way, there are serious federal penalties if one is convicted of jury tampering. I believe it's up to $250,000 in fines. And depending on whether state or federal charges are leveled, between 10 and 20 years maximum prison sentence. So it's no joke what lies ahead here.
the trial of the century in South Carolina, people, and it looks like it could be, never thought we'd say this, it looks like it could be undone.
I can't even believe that came out of your mouth right now.
A lot of things people can't believe come out of this mouth, Jen. Let me tell you. Nobody on this podcast is afraid of saying much of anything. I think.
I mean, leading up to this, everybody's like, "What do you think they have?" And it's hard to say with Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin because a lot of times they're good at blowing smoke and puffing up their chest and making it seem like they have something. You're like, is that really something? But like when I saw this motion, it took me a hot second to read through that.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly promise big, and again, if these allegations, as we've all talked about, if they're even half true, it would be seismic. Dylan, I want to go back to something you said, and I want to get the thoughts of everybody on this panel about it. You talked about the Attorney General needing to endorse the request for, at the very least, the investigation. You actually jumped ahead and said they should endorse a new trial already.
No, I didn't. I said if they corroborate what has been alleged here, if there's any level of corroboration of even a quarter of the allegations, then I don't see how the Attorney General benefits at all from dragging their heels.
Kelly and Jen, y'all in agreement?
Yeah, my brain hadn't gotten that far yet. But yeah, I mean, now that he says it, yeah, I do actually, I agree with what he's saying. I think that Dick and Jim are correct in saying that SLED should not handle that investigation. I think SLED has a strong vested interest in the outcome of that investigation, and I do think it should be handled federally.
Kelly?
How tragic, because we saw the prosecution work so hard for this victory, and they were so proud of it when they got that verdict. So how very sad that it could be undone by one person. And it reminds me of something my mother always says, which is that the truth is good enough. You don't have to add to the truth. If it's the truth, that's a good enough argument, just the truth.
It's a wise woman there, no doubt about it. Well, one of the things we also need to address as we think about where this thing is going, this is happening at a moment of peak tension between state and federal prosecutors over the handling of these cases, over who takes the lead in these cases. I mean, this is occurring at a time when the state and the feds are literally at each other's throats. And now Harpootlian and Griffin have basically, as Dylan said, put the state in a position they almost have to endorse a federal investigation into this. Now, one thing I do want to point out to our audience, we have confirmed, have not even published this yet on FITSNews.com, but we have confirmed just today that there is an ongoing state investigation into these allegations. The State Law Enforcement Division is investigating these allegations. They were reportedly in Colleton all last week, digging on these very allegations. But according to Harpootlian and Griffin, that inquiry needs to be shut down and handed over to the feds. Jen Wood, do you agree with that? Should SLED stop its inquiry and turn this case over to?
Yeah, they should never been within a country mile of that investigation ever.
Callie?
Yeah, if ever there was a time to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, this would be it. Somebody else needs to handle this investigation.
Dylan, should SLED shut down its probe and turn it over to the FBI?
It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I remember Judge Newman specifically referencing SLED when he was dismissing the egg juror. So yeah, they're too close to this, in my opinion.
Indeed. And Harpootlian, as you previously noted, Dylan, at that press conference announcing these just seismic revelations, pointed out SLED's lack of objectivity in his view as it relates to this. Dylan, you and I were there today at the press conference. You've got a clip from that. Do we want to roll that real quick? Show folks a little bit of what we saw from Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin today?
Let's do it.
Let's roll that clip real quick.
So immediately in the aftermath of the verdict, we had received information that we needed to look into what happened in the jury room. We started down that road and we met a zone of silence. No jurors would speak to us. And so we were, what I like to call, we were given the Heisman, right? And then when the clerk of court wrote her book, published her book, that zone of silence collapsed. And jurors were upset about that, the ones we talked with, and they were more than willing to come forward and tell us the things that we had sort of heard through a whisper campaign. And so as a result of that, we were able to interview some jurors. Now, there's still a number of jurors who maintain that zone of silence, who have not talked to us. We did try to reach out to most all of them that we could get in touch with, but the information we got, I can tell you, was independent of each juror. The first juror we talked to, we got information about Ms. Hill saying, "Don't be fooled." And then the second juror, independent of the first juror, says the same thing, and the third juror, independent of the other two, say the same thing. And so we're very confident that the information is accurate.
Well,
He was on fire today. I mean, Jim Griffin, I thought
We were all on fire. It was 95 degrees out there.
Wow.
But Jim was very on fire.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he did very well in the press conference today. And one thing, so I was watching, Twitter and, social media platforms to, see what lawyers within South Carolina were saying about this, because I think it's interesting, the procedural. I know you guys call me a nerd, but I think the procedure behind this is very interesting. And Eric Bland released a press statement, and underneath that, he tweeted about Alex's testimony, because the big question is, if he does get granted a new trial, will he take the stand again? Because, that was, I think that was kind of one of the things that did him in. And Eric Bland, I haven't checked this legally, but he's an attorney, said that even if he doesn't take the stand, he testified under oath in the previous trials, so that testimony would still be admissible.
Oh, wow.
So
We'll have to get our legal counsel digging on that. That would be crazy.
Yeah, I haven't had time to dig into that to see, how that works legally, but we also have the financial crimes. Judge Newman ruled to let those in. Would those be allowed by a different judge if there was a new trial? Just like so many things that I know you guys don't think are as interesting, but I think legally there's going to be some unprecedented decisions that need to be made.
Well, that's the word of the day, unprecedented. That's one of the things that Griffin said regarding the alleged jury tampering in this case. Said it was the worst he'd seen in his career as an attorney. And speaking of jury tampering, Callie, I mean, if we...
How ironic. Mark Tinsley even talked about this in his testimony. Threatening Alex, basically. Don't mess with my jury, right? Because they're known for that. So how very ironic that this happened to Alex.
Oh, yeah. We've heard reports from Hampton County about the, let's just say, questionable integrity of the jury process in there, while the House of Murdaugh reigned supreme for, again, over a century down there in the 14th Judicial Circuit. More than 86 years, Murdaugh held the office of 14th Circuit Solicitor, and they've been running the show since then with Alec Murdaugh as an assistant solicitor and that powerful law firm down there, the now called the Parker Law Firm, but the firm that the Murdaughs were integral in founding. Just unbelievable how this story has evolved. We're on a day we never thought we would encounter with these allegations, which, again, as we've all, I think, agreed, if they're even half legitimate, Alec Murdaugh is going to get a new trial.
If he is granted a new trial, right, we've got a change of plea hearing coming up on September 21st in his federal charges that he's facing relating to the financial crimes. So let's say he is granted a new trial. Obviously they're going to request bond. The judge could deny it, and if he's pled guilty, can he be moved over to the federal prison system?
Well, I don't think it's any coincidence, Jen, that you pointed out the change in the federal plea, sort of an initial chess move.
Mm-hmm.
But this one today, just unbelievable. Completely shifted the entire paradigm of the biggest murder case in the history of the Palmetto State. Again, the case of the century, the trial of the century. We thought it was over. We were wrong. It is not over, folks. But as we look back, again, we had every intention this week of dropping our second episode, Death on the Tracks. Again, story out of Dorchester. Jen, you and Callie have been all over that story. Just an absolutely unspeakable tragedy. We look forward to getting back to that story soon. But we may have a little bit of Murdaugh drama to cover for the foreseeable future. We will keep our audience in the loop on that. And also, don't forget, if you're new to FITSFiles, go back. The first 6 episodes of this show were devoted to another big case we've been covering up in Greenville, South Carolina, the Rose Petal murder. Just another case with more twists and turns. They always say truth is stranger than fiction, and we are seeing that in the stories that we are covering here at FITSNews. But before we go, I want to thank everybody on this panel: Jen Wood, our research director; Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects; our researcher, Callie Lyons. But I also want to thank everybody who's subscribed to FITSnews.com. If you subscribed to us at the beginning of the Murdaughs back in 2021, we're grateful. If you subscribe to us because of the Rose Petal story or the Death on the Tracks story, thank you. Those subscriptions help us hold those in power accountable. Nothing's more important than that, people, because again, when justice is at stake, when truth is at stake, we need to be able to trust the process. And the allegations that were put forward today are exactly the sort of thing that this news outlet exists to expose. And you can count on us to continue to do that. And again, it's your support that helps make that possible. So thank you for tuning in to this very special edition of FITSFiles. Again, your home for true crime, wherever you download podcasts. We look forward to joining you again next week.